Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, may we all rise for the arrival of the President of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia and the Chairperson of the African Union Commission.
Thank you very much. It's okay.
Yeah. Thank you. May we all be seated? Your Excellency, the President of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia, Your Excellency, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Ahead of the official launch of the AU theme during the Assembly of Heads of State and Government, the African Union Commission has organized the pre-launch of the theme of the year of Education 2024. And this is to galvanize the already existing high-level political support and commitment to ensuring implementation of the theme through sustainable and predictable financing for education in Africa. This event brings us together, education stakeholders, to spotlight and guarantee that all African children and adolescents can learn and build the skills they need for the 21st century. Today, we embark on a collective mission, one that transcends borders, cultures, and generations. We gather here not just as witnesses, but as active participants in shaping the future of our beloved continent. Tonight, we pre-launch education as the theme of the year for 2024, with a profound focus, and that is education, or educate an Africa fit for the 21st century. As we stand on the threshold of this new era, let us pause to reflect on the significance of our collective endeavor. For far too long, the promise of education has eluded millions across our continent. Too many bright minds have been consigned to the shadows of poverty and deprivation, their dreams stifled by a lack of opportunity. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today and in the days to come, we declare with unwavering conviction that the tide is turning. We refuse to accept a future where potential goes unrealized, where talent remains untapped. Instead, we pledge to harness the power of education as a force for good, as a catalyst for change that knows no bounds. The mission is clear. It is to build an Africa fit for the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. It is a task that demands courage, creativity, and unwavering commitment. Tonight, we pre-launch not just a theme, but a movement fueled by the belief that education has the power to transform lives, to uplift communities, and to build a brighter future for all. Without further ado, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I now have the honor to invite the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Musa Faki Mohammed, to welcome our guests and open this event. Your Excellency, sir.
Thank you very much. Excellence, Madame Sahle-Work Souédé, présidente de la République fédérale et démocratique d'Éthiopie, Madame la secrétaire générale de l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, Monsieur le commissaire, Madame la vice-présidente de la Commission de l'Union africaine, Mesdames et Messieurs les commissaires, Madame la secrétaire exécutive de ODA-NEPAD, Mesdames et Messieurs les ambassadeurs, chers amis, Mesdames et Messieurs, c'est un grand plaisir et un honneur de vous accueillir toutes et tous à ce pré-lancement historique du thème de l'Union africaine pour l'année 2024. Éduquer une Afrique adaptée au XXIe siècle, construire des systèmes éducatifs résilients pour un accès accru à un apprentissage inclusif, qualitatif tout au long de la vie et pertinent pour l'Afrique. Tout un programme. Grâce à ces thèmes, nous voulons tout d'abord rappeler que l'éducation étant un droit humain, un bien public et une responsabilité publique et partagée, il s'agit aussi de mener des réflexions approfondies sur les réformes éducatives nécessaires et sur les actions transformatrices concrètes qui seront entreprises pour construire des systèmes éducatifs accessibles, qualitatifs, sûrs et résilients dans un monde en mutation profonde et multidimensionnelle. Votre participation et présence personnelle à cette cérémonie de pré-lancement démontrent l'importance de l'éducation et du développement du capital humain sur notre avenir à tous en Afrique et au-delà. Le succès de la mise en œuvre de ces thèmes dépendra de notre capacité à investir d'une manière plus ambitieuse et effective dans l'éducation afin d'exploiter au mieux l'immense potentiel de notre jeunesse avide de savoir, d'entreprendre et de s'épanouir chez elle. Ce pari qu'on prend aujourd'hui aura des répercussions importantes, inestimables, sur les secteurs clés tels que la paix et la sécurité, la santé, l'autonomisation des femmes et des filles, l'industrie, l'agriculture, la numéralisation, la migration, et j'en passe. La réforme de l'éducation inversera la tendance à la pauvreté et renforcera l'attrait de l'Afrique en termes d'investissement et en fin de compte, de création de prospérité. Une éducation inclusive, de qualité et tout au long de la vie ne sera pas seulement un outil de promotion individuelle, mais aussi le catalyseur du développement durable, de la cohésion sociale et de la transformation économique de l'Afrique. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, l'éducation, en tant que responsabilité collective et partagée, exige que nous renforcions la collaboration et que nous fassions front commun pour relever les défis qui nous attendent. Ensemble, en tant que leaders dans nos domaines respectifs et à tous les niveaux, nous avons le pouvoir de conduire des changements positifs et de façonner le paysage éducatif de l'Afrique pour les générations actuelles et à venir. Mais il est des défis structurels qui nécessitent une action globale ou continentale pour les relever. Je vais parler ici du déficit financier structurel auquel fait face le système éducatif en Afrique, et particulièrement en Afrique subsaharienne. Ce déficit est estimé à 118 milliards de dollars d'ici 2030. Si on veut atteindre les objectifs de notre stratégie continentale de l'éducation, ou les indicateurs des ODD, l'indicateur 4, à ces propos, notre continent a pris l'initiative de créer un fonds africain pour l'éducation, la science, la technologie et l'innovation qui sera géré par la Banque africaine de développement. Mais ces fonds ne suffira sûrement pas. Nous sommes prêts à apporter ces plaidoyers dans tous les forats internationaux. Il y va de l'avenir de notre jeunesse. De même, le continent souffre d'un déficit majeur d'enseignants. Et le rapport récent du groupe de haut niveau sur la fonction enseignante mis en place par le secrétaire général des Nations Unies, qui donne des orientations précises des revalorisations de la fonction et des carrières, arrive à point nommé pour impulser les indispensables actions pour nos États membres pour une révision radicale des politiques de formation, de recyclage et de rétention des enseignants. Si la responsabilité première d'un système éducatif relève de l'État, les autres acteurs ont un rôle à jouer. Les parents, les communautés, la société civile, le secteur privé. Des liens plus étroits avec le secteur privé sont les meilleurs moyens de garantir que l'éducation réponde aux besoins du marché du travail. Pour conclure, mesdames et messieurs, permettez-moi de réaffirmer que la Commission de l'Union africaine est engagée dans cette cause et qu'elle fournira le leadership nécessaire pour coordonner nos efforts collectifs en vue d'éduquer et de qualifier l'Afrique pour le XXIe siècle. Je tiens à vous exprimer ma profonde gratitude pour votre présence et votre engagement pour l'éducation en Afrique. Votre dévouement est essentiel pour ouvrir la voie à un avenir plus radieux pour les jeunes d'Afrique, dotés des capacités intellectuelles, scientifiques et éthiques nécessaires pour transformer notre continent. Une fois de plus, je tiens à vous souhaiter la bienvenue à ce pré-lancement du thème de l'année 2024. Puisse ces thèmes déboucher sur des collaborations significatives qui continueront au-delà de 2024 et laisseront un impact durable sur le paysage éducatif de l'Afrique. Madame la Présidente, Mesdames et Messieurs, je suis le fils d'un enseignant et j'ai été élevé par un enseignant. Ce métier noble, très exigeant, doit être à sa place. Négliger les enseignants, c'est négliger l'avenir des pays, des nations, des sociétés du continent. Le commissaire, le professeur Belroussine, hier nous a donné un chiffre. Il y a un déficit de 17 millions d'enseignants en Afrique. Et on ne peut pas arriver à l'Afrique que nous voulons, l'Afrique que nous rêvons, sans relever ces défis premiers qui est celui de l'éducation. Et cela ne peut être fait naturellement qu'avec des enseignants formés. Madame la Présidente, je sais que ce thème est très cher à vous. Je sais le travail extraordinaire que vous avez fait, notamment avec l'UNESCO sur la question. Je sais que nombre de ministres de nos États, je sais que nos partenaires, notamment l'UNESCO et les autres, la francophonie, travaillent sur la question de l'éducation. Pour l'Afrique, avoir choisi ce thème cette année 2024 est un choix qui ne procède pas du hasard. Si nous voulons transformer l'Afrique, si nous voulons être en phase avec l'évolution du monde, si nous voulons rétablir la paix et la stabilité, le développement, dont les relations dynamiques sont connues, il faut d'abord éduquer nos enfants. C'est le défi que nous nous sommes lancés et avec votre concours et votre engagement, cela est possible. We can do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for those unequivocal words of support and commitment to education as an instrument for Africa's socio-economic transformation. I now have the honor to invite Her Excellency Saleho Zewde, who is the President of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia. Your Excellency.
Tout le monde n'a pas la taille du président de la Commission. Excellences, Monsieur le Président de la Commission de l'Union africaine et mon cher frère Moussa Faki Mahamat, our Minister of Education of Ethiopia, Professeur Brahanu, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres présents ici, secrétaire exécutif de la CEA, Monsieur le commissaire de l'Union africaine, je ne respecte peut-être pas l'ordre, mais je veux quand même reconnaître les gens présents ici, ma sœur, la secrétaire générale de la francophonie, une autre sœur, la CEO de Aouda Nepad, une autre sœur, la directrice générale adjointe de l'UNESCO, Mesdames et Messieurs. Chairperson, I would like to thank you for having invited me to this ceremony marking the year of education 2024 under the theme Educate an African fit for the 21st century, building resilient education systems for increased access to inclusive, lifelong, quality and relevant learning in Africa. It is important to have organized this meeting, and I thank you for that. As you have mentioned very clearly, we need the collaboration of all, not only governments, but also partners. So I think this is a very important initiative that you have taken. I could see that you're speaking from your heart, because for someone who knows what education means in a family, I think it takes you a long way. I started my career as a civil servant in the Ministry of Education of Ethiopia, and I'm convinced that that's where I have left my heart. I'm particularly honored to be here, not only representing my own country, but because also I had the unique privilege and responsibility of chairing the International Commission on the Futures of Education established by UNESCO 3 years ago. The report of the International Commission, entitled Reimagining Our Futures Together, a New Social Contract for Education, has been a key reference for the Transforming Education Summit launched by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in New York. The recommendations must remain our guiding light for the transformation of education at this key juncture as we shape Africa's future. We have a vision for the Africa we want. This was clearly outlined in the 2063 Agenda of the African Union. We have a vision for the world we want. This has been articulated in the Global 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development of the United Nations. Education is at the heart of these two visions. Education is the necessary foundation for the development for all sectors of our societies. The world, and indeed Africa, are facing formidable challenges to ensure inclusive, just, and sustainable futures. Inequalities persist, divides are growing deeper, and conflict, with its devastating consequences, continue to plague our development efforts. Our ecosystems are increasingly overwhelmed and exacerbated by rapid population growth and urbanization. Technological innovation is disrupting our daily lives at an ever-increasing pace. Our development approaches are under strain and require a radical change of course. This has been echoed in the report of our Commission on the Futures of Education, and I quote what we said: "We are faced with an existential choice: continue on an unsustainable path or radically change course." End of quote. But no trend is destiny. There is a reason for hope. We can shape more just, inclusive, and sustainable futures. Knowledge, learning, education are key to changing course. The Continental Education Strategy for Africa, 2016-2025, much like SDG 4, have provided the framework of commitments, targets, and strategies to strengthen education. The Transforming Education Summit has given new impetus for the mobilization of the international education community. Strengthened political commitment to education is indeed key. We must absolutely increase financing to education, training, and research. But to truly transform education, more of the same will not do. We cannot be thinking merely in terms of accelerating progress toward the education goals we have set at the global level or for our continent. We must transform education. It's not only about more education. To transform the future of Africa, we need a different education. We need to rethink our educational models and approaches. The persistent educational exclusion across the continent is just not acceptable. The challenges are stark and are well documented. While we have the largest share of youth in the world, 1 of 5 children is out of primary school. Almost 6 in 10 adolescents are out of secondary schools. The proportion of young people not in employment, education, or training in sub-Saharan Africa has worsened over the past 10 years. Access to higher education is dramatically low, with enrollment ratios 4 times less than the world average of 40%. We must recognize that some of our approaches are not working anymore. We need more fundamental changes to our models. This is the spirit of transformation. Transformation cannot simply be about reform. We need a different approach to pedagogies and curricula. There can be no transformation of education without renewing what and how we teach and learn, including how to unlearn what we have learned. We must decolonize curricula. We must move to greater interdisciplinary. We must build on our rich heritage of knowledge systems and linguistic diversity. This is what we should be doing. Only a transformed education can be transformative. Renewal means going beyond reform. Efforts to improve our existing education systems is not enough. Educational renewal implies systems that are different from today. This is the spirit of the report of our Commission on the Futures of Education. To transform education, to shape alternative futures, we need innovation. And yet, only some 0.6% of GDP is invested in research and development, 3 times less than the global average. This must change. But innovation is not only a top-down, it's also a bottom-up. This requires policies that support innovative initiatives by teachers, schools, and communities. We need to support initiatives that come from below and that are shared across communities of teachers and networks of schools. Transforming education does not imply starting from scratch. There is much to build on. The 2023 Continental Educational Strategy for Africa report, for instance, documented a range of promising experiences and innovations that can and must be sources of inspiration. A renewed social contract for education needs to leverage innovation at all levels, from local communities to the system. I cannot emphasize enough that there can be no transformation of education without teachers. We must get serious about addressing the central challenge of teacher shortages. We must address the working conditions of teachers, the issue of contract of teachers. How can we possibly transform education when we know there is a decline in the share of qualified teachers on our continent in both primary and secondary education? This must be our starting point. There is no transformation of education without transforming the teaching profession. Without well-educated and qualified teachers working in collaboration, there is no hope of transforming education, neither in Africa nor anywhere else, in fact, in the world. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the current crossroad of development for Africa and the world that we find ourselves in, as we recall our vision for the Africa we want, as we look at the 2030 agenda and beyond, as we shape the pact for the future to be adopted at the UN General Assembly in September this year, let us remember that to radically change course, to shape for just and sustainable futures, we must transform education. As we define a new continental education strategy for Africa beyond 2025, let us remember one of the key messages of the International Commission that I just mentioned, that more of the same will not do. Transform education, we must renew that and how we teach and learn. Only by renewing the social contract for education in these directions can we hope to transform education and for the future of Africa. The unique opportunity that this African Union Year of Education represents in terms of political and social mobilization to renew the social contract for education in Africa cannot be missed. We must succeed in our concerted efforts to renew this social contract for education and to shape more inclusive, more just, more sustainable futures for the world and for Africa. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for those inspiring words, and thank you for gracing the ceremony. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the African Union Commission, Department of Education, Science, Technology and Innovation, has enjoyed the patronage of its partners here present in achieving this giant stride and getting to this point. They have contributed immensely to all of our efforts to mobilize governments to rethink the models of education and skills development needed for the Africa we want. And we continue to count on this partnership to make it a successful year of education. In that regard, it's my pleasure to invite them to share a few words of commitment towards the implementation of the roadmap on the theme of the year 2024. And to begin that segment, I am pleased to invite the Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General and Distinguished Professor of Economics and Global Leader in Sustainable Development, Professor Jeffrey Sachs.
Madam President, Chairperson, Head of UNECA, and all of the distinguished delegates here, and so many friends and so many people that I admire. I can't imagine a more important event for Africa's future than this event. There is no more important investment that Africa can make, whether it's electrification or roads or rail or fiber. Investment in your children and in their skills is far and away in every dimension, and I'm not speaking only of the moral dimension, I'm speaking of the economic dimension, by far the most important investment that can be made. It's a long-term investment. A child today will reap that investment for a 70-year lifetime. It will take you 20 years to get the returns on this investment, because you want that child to start in pre-K and to complete upper secondary education and to then achieve advanced skills and then to enter the labor market. And we're talking about a 25-year period. But the returns on that for every dimension of society are completely unparalleled. And if you make a simple calculation, and I can show you on an Excel spreadsheet, and it's not hyperbole, the internal rate of return of that investment is more than 20% per year compound annual return over a period of decades. That's better than Apple, that's better than Google, that's better than any investment you're going to make. Africa's sitting on the highest return investment in the world, which is your children. You've got a lot of them, and you've got a lot to educate. The current situation does not work, as Madam President just said. And it doesn't work on simple financial terms. And let me explain why. To educate all of the children in Africa requires a level of outlays that no budget in this continent can afford. And that's the simple reason why hundreds of millions of kids are being left behind right now. And the reason is rather straightforward, and I want to explain it in just 1 minute. Africa has the highest share of school-aged population in the total population of any part of the world. This is the result of the high fertility rates, the rapid population growth. So the age population pyramid has the widest base. You've got a lot of kids. The school-age population is at least a third of the total population. In some countries, it's nearly 40% of the total population. At the same time, the cost of providing education to a child, measured in terms of GDP per capita, is higher in Africa than any other place in the world, for the simple reason that to hire a teacher is to hire somebody with a salary that is high relative to the average per capita earnings of the population. So education measured in GDP per capita and the number of children to be educated per capita are both very large. If you make a simple calculation, say that a third of the children are at school age, and it could be higher, and say that the cost per child of a proper education is a half of GDP per capita, which is a reasonable estimate, then you're talking about 1/3 times 1/3 times 1/2, or 1/6 of GDP required to educate all of the children. That would be 16% of GDP. That is almost the entire budget of most countries. The calculation's completely different in a rich country. In a rich country, the school-age population might be 15%, or 1/6 of the total population because of the fertility rate difference. And at the same time, the cost per child is not a half of GDP per capita. Maybe it's a fifth of GDP per capita. When you then do the same calculation, you find out you need 3% of GDP, not 16% of GDP, to educate in a high-income country because of the difference of cost structure and the difference of population. What's my point? I don't want to be boring with numbers. My point is that we're faking it a little bit. African governments cannot afford SDG 4. They may want to do it, but they can't afford it. None. And so when you look at the secondary completion rates, they're 1/3, 25%, 30%. This is devastating for Africa's future. They need to be 100%. They need to be at least 90% plus. Every child would love that. A place in school with a qualified teacher, proper facilities, and a future. But it's out of reach of the budgets. So what happens right now? I'm sorry to say it, we pretend. We pretend because what happens is, first, we have our development aid, and it's a tiny fraction of what's really needed. The Global Partnership for Education, a wonderful initiative, is $800 million a year, not $200 billion a year. Sorry. It's not good enough to check the box. The numbers actually matter. We don't fund education. Then the finance minister, hearing from the education minister, says, I'd love to help you, but I can't. I don't have the budget. And then the finance minister goes to Washington and meets my students who are now senior officials at the IMF, and they're told, Minister, you have to live within your means. Of course it's important to have education. We're all with you. We love that. Of course we know there's a gap. But inflation, Minister, you must live within your means. And this goes on year after year, decade after decade. And I'm telling you one true thing. If you get every child in school properly educated, Africa will grow at least 7% per year, compound for the next 40 years, at least. I would say 10% a year. If you do that, and we have the distinguished delegation from Japan, and I'm thinking of the Ikeda decade of doubling, when Prime Minister Ikeda said we will double our income in a decade in the 1960s. And they did it. With very excellent education, by the way. Africa can double every decade for the next 4 decades. That's 4 doublings. Africa would be 16 times the size of the current economy. Actually, I think it can be 10% a year, which means doubling every 7 years. If you do that for 42 years, that's 6 doublings. That's 60 times the size of today's economy. So this is by far the best investment, but it is by far not achievable with the local budgets right now. It will become achievable in 25 years after the growth, then Africa will take over. But it has to be financed up front, because it's only 25, 30, 40 years where you're going to see all of the returns. So we need another $200 billion a year What is that? That's about 10% of Africa's GDP. That's the gap. Instead of spending 4% of GDP on education, it should be about 14% of GDP. That's a pretty accurate number. And then the IMF's going to blow a gasket. How could you borrow 10% of GDP? And the answer, I would remind my students, is that if you grow 30 times, what looks large today will be very small when the debt comes due. So here's the other part of this. We need long-term financing, not a 7-year Eurobond, which absolutely will go into default if you try to finance a 40-year return on 7-year bonds rolled over every 7 years. That's impossible. What we need is a good 40-year return on a 40-year loan. Now, we have a very esteemed World Bank delegation here. IDA lends at 38 years. IBRD lends at 35 years. The African Development Bank, also long-term. We need a massive expansion of that quality long-term lending. Massive. But then I would say to the finance ministers, borrow at 40 years, 4% interest to get a 20% rate of return and watch your economy grow, doubling at least every decade, if not faster. But my plea to everybody is let's be real. Let's be quantitative. Let's not just be nice, saying how much we love education. Let's get the kids in school and calculate the burden that are needed to do that, and to calculate for each country what is needed to do that, and to fill the gap, and to make sure that we accompany this young generation of Africans so that they meet their full potential. Africa will be and should be, absolutely can be, the fastest growing part of the world economy for the next 40 years. Africa's going to be at least 30% of the world population soon. Your role is going to be enormously large. I predict the investors are going to become running here in 20 or 30 years because this is where the booming market's going to be. But to get that going, build the core of this. Every child in school, and yes, electricity for every home and for every school, digital access, a device for every kid, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet. Let's make this real and watch Africa be the greatest success story in the world economy in the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Now we move on to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And I am pleased to invite His Excellency Dr. Clever Gatete, who is the Executive Secretary of the Commission, to deliver the UNECA commitment.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very difficult to follow Professor Jeffrey Sachs. As a former finance minister, I was feeling very uncomfortable because I thought he was telling me what I did not do right. So thank you so much. Your Excellency Sahle-Work Zewde, President of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Your Excellency Musa Faki Mohammed, Chairperson of the African Commission, Your Excellency Secretary General Louise Mushikiwabo, the SG of La Francophonie, Your Excellency Dr. Monique Sanzabaganwa, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, honorable ministers here present, Commissioner of Education, heads of African Union agencies. I saw my sister here from Auda NEPAD, heads of sister UN agencies here present, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to join you at this pre-launch event on the African Union theme of the year. As I said yesterday in my statement to the Executive Council of Ministers, by the year 2030, nearly 1 in 2 young people globally will be African. And that's a big challenge. Therefore, the call to move from commitment to action reflects the urgency of the task that lie ahead for all of us. High quality education and lifelong learning are the catalysts to achieve Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063. When individuals are equipped with the right knowledge and skills, they are empowered to make informed decisions. They can lead healthier lives. They can build resilience when faced with development challenges. However, we know that our education systems require urgent reforms, as mentioned, if it is going to get us to the Africa we want. Only education unusual will deliver the SDGs and Agenda 2063 for Africa. In this 21st century, it is not okay that 1 in 5 children of school age do not attend school. The skill set of future global workforce has skewed towards technology. Digitization is now playing an increasing role. In addition, recent global shocks like the COVID-19 have shown the benefits of more skills in data analytics, behavioral science, and foresight analysis. They help governments to develop better policies and capabilities to respond to the unknowns and build resilience. The actions we take today will determine if Africa gains or loses. We need education programs that improve affordability, quality institutional credibility, and delivers employable skills and entrepreneurship attributes. It also means that our education must enable our member states to accelerate the implementation of the SDGs and Agenda 2063. We therefore cannot overemphasize the importance of science, technology, and innovation, and initiatives that promote technical and vocational education and training. Indeed, the benefits that Africa can realize by getting our education system right is undeniable. But we cannot do this if only 2% of African universities are ranked in the top 500 globally in STEM fields. We will not succeed if women remain underrepresented at less than 30% in the high-tech domains such as artificial intelligence. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we must rally all stakeholders to unleash Africa's transformation through innovation. But first, we must address the structural barriers that continue to impact educational outcomes, especially barriers of inclusivity, affordability, accessibility, and applicability. Our education system must also be context-specific and leverage the natural comparative advantage of countries. For example, there is no reason why Chad's livestock sector or Ethiopian livestock sector cannot be a global competitor on leather goods. It's not inconceivable to think that Ghanaian and Ivorian chocolate cannot one day compete with the Swiss equivalent. The blue economy in Comoros can drive the new frontier for Africa Renaissance, as called for by the Agenda 2063. This can be possible if our education systems are aligned with market and society needs. Intentional and nurtured partnerships between governments, industries, and academic institutions can support knowledge and technology transfer that serve the needs of industrial sectors. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is true, as mentioned by Professor Sachs, that we are faced with very constraining fiscal space, but the opportunity cost of inaction is a far more expensive price to pay. Securing the necessary resources to reform our education system should not be either-or situation. In this regard, private sector also has a critical role to play. We must indeed seize this moment to move from commitment to action. I want to reassure you of ECA's continued support as we launch this important theme of the year. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. The next commitment we will hear from is that of a key partner in this endeavor, and that is UNESCO. UNESCO has played a critical role in co-chairing the steering committee of the theme of the year. In that regard, it's also my pleasure to invite Stefania Giannini, Assistant Director General of UNESCO, to make UNESCO's commitment. Welcome.
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ethiopia, dear President Sahle-Work Zewde, Your Excellency Moussa Faki Mohammed, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, many I see also here in this important meeting. On behalf of UNESCO, I'm really honored to be here today to mark the launch of education as the AU theme of the year of 2024. Africa, as you maybe know, is a global priority for UNESCO. We are convinced that the road to global development runs through Africa, with education paving the way. We have seen a significant political commitment within the continent through the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, the CESA, the national commitments of 41 African member states at the Transforming Education Summit, and the adoption of the African Union Declaration on Transforming Education in Africa. And I wish to thank particularly here Her Excellency President Sahle-Work Zewde for her remarkable, passionate leadership in guiding the milestone Futures of Education initiative and the report, which was framing the vision for, let's say, moving from a culture of reforming education systems to the culture we need to transform education systems, to transform society. And I wish to acknowledge the great engagement of the Commissioner Belossin, which is very much behind this year of education for Africa 2024. However, despite all of us being so convinced, we just heard Professor Sachs, a dear friend, a strong ally in our common mission to make education a human right, a common public good, a real right for all. Despite all of these, we all aware of the major barriers that still remain. We already heard some figures, but let me focus on some complementary important information. Africa has the world's largest out-of-school population, 63 million children out of school, 20% of primary school-aged children, and 60% of adolescents. But even those in school, and maybe this is the most scaring part of the story, these and even those in school are not learning, or learning as they not should be. According to UNESCO data, 9 in 10 of the continent's 10 years old are unable to read and understand a simple test. against the 70%, which is the average we estimated with our colleagues and partners, UNESCO, UNICEF, World Bank report 3 years ago now, as the impact of COVID-19. We also know that the quality of learning depends on the quality of teaching. I was moved, dear chairperson, from your final statement on the importance of teachers, the most important profession for sure in society. And let's say very honestly and clearly in this room and behind and beyond, the less valorized in terms of salary, in terms of social prestige, in terms of the recognition of the work they are doing, which is building the future of the next generation. And still, we have a huge gap here. 70 million for the continent out of 44 million teachers, qualified teachers, we need to reach SDG 4 by 2030. Well, it's not a light and pink picture, the situation of education, but we know that overcoming these challenges can be done. It requires a true transformative approach supported by a massive, unprecedented increase in education financing. Thank you, Jeff, for preaching a bit the converted, possibly here, but also explaining so technically and so understandably the rationale behind. Today, UNESCO released a new paper showing that there is a staggering annual gap of 77 billion for African countries to reach their national education targets by 2030 and accommodate an additional 100 million more students in schools. Bon, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, il s'agit d'une urgence éducative dramatique. Et l'UNESCO met tous ses moyens en œuvre pour répondre à cette crise. À cette fin, je voudrais tout simplement vous proposer aujourd'hui au moins 3 axes d'action concrète conjointe à développer dans l'année de l'éducation 2024 pour l'Afrique. Un lien bien sûr étroit avec les priorités de l'Union africaine et son agenda 2063, ainsi avec les engagements pris au sommet pour la transformation de l'éducation par quelque chose comme 167 chefs d'État et de gouvernement. D'abord, la transformation digitale, surtout pour les filles et les femmes, et le rôle des universités dans sa mise en œuvre. Ça, c'est un point qui n'est pas suffisamment souligné. Les universités sont vraiment les outils et les lieux pour créer des écosystèmes d'innovation et du développement. L'accès à l'éducation pour une population jeune qui devrait atteindre 800 millions d'ici 2050 ne sera possible que si nous tirons parti des technologies numériques. C'est pourquoi nous avons lancé avec l'UNICEF l'initiative globale Digital Learning Pathway, qui est une des initiatives du TES pour aider les pays à développer l'apprentissage numérique comme un bien public, accessible et équitable. Notre nouvelle initiative Campus Africa, qui vise à connecter et créer des établissements d'enseignement supérieur d'excellence, s'inscrit également dans ce cadre. Deuxième point, il s'agit aussi du rôle crucial de la formation technique et professionnelle pour mieux connecter l'éducation au monde du travail, mais aussi pour renforcer l'écosystème d'innovation qui en Afrique est encore très faible. Mais surtout, il s'agit, c'est la vision de l'UNESCO, comme vous bien savez, de redessiner l'identité et la notion de citoyenneté à travers l'éducation aux droits humains, l'éducation au développement durable, l'éducation à la paix. Ça, c'est l'esprit avec lequel le contenu de notre monumentale, je dirais, histoire générale de l'Afrique soit reflétée et intégrée dans les programmes scolaires pour que les jeunes africains apprennent une histoire écrite par des historiens africains avec une perspective africaine. This is the transformation we need, and this is the transformation we want in a nutshell. You can count on UNESCO, Your Excellencies, for helping supporting this transformation to happen in the coming months and years. I thank you very much.
Thank you. It's now the turn of UNICEF, and I now invite Felicite Chibindat, Regional Director for Western Central Africa, for UNICEF's commitment.
Thank you. Your Excellency, President Sahle-Work Swede of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia, Her Excellency Azali Assoumani, President of the Union of Comoros and Chairperson of the African Union, Her Excellency Mr. Moussa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. It is an honor to speak on behalf of UNICEF's Executive Director, Ms. Catherine Russell, who sends her warm wishes for an impactful event. President Nelson Mandela said, quote, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world," end quote. For many of us here who through education have risen from humble backgrounds to the highest position of influence and leadership, education has been transformative for our countries and continents. UNICEF applauds the African Union for the bold decision to declare 2024 the Year of Education. In September 2022, during the Transforming Education Summit, we agreed to global actions and commitments to transforming education in the world. Many heads of state and government gathered under the leadership of the African Union Commission for a deeper reflection on how to reverse the learning crisis in Africa. This resulted in a declaration with 12 commitments to transform education in Africa. To realize the incredible promise of education, we need systems that are fit for purpose, ambitious, bold, and inspired by African environment where our children live and will eventually work. We must equip our young people with the skills they need to be agile, adaptable, and creative critical thinkers in tune with this rapidly changing world. Africa is undergoing a rapid transition, and children and youth are at the center. They are already shaping the course of the continent. By the middle of this century, Africa will be home to 1 billion children and adolescents, 40% of the global population. We must accelerate the results set out in the African Union Continental Education Strategy and the Sustainable Development Goal. Excellency, over the last 2 decades, governments in Africa have made substantial progress in getting more children in school. However, they still face an unprecedented learning crisis. Being in school does not necessarily mean receiving a quality education. In fact, only 1 in 5 children in Africa aged 10 years can read and understand a simple story. Without action, this learning crisis will cost the current generation an estimated $21 trillion in future earnings. This year of education is pivotal to rethink education and make brave decisions to address the learning crisis. For instance, how can we attract and retain the best teachers to educate, inspire, and equip our children for Africa's promising future? How to scale up technology and innovation to connect children and support learning? Indeed, how can we reach long-lasting, transformative changes in education? Education is fundamental in the Convention of the Right of the Child and the African Charter of the Rights and Welfare of the Child. In that spirit, and during this year of education, we could focus on three simple things. One, more equitable and efficient allocation and expenditure of resource for all levels of education. Second, significantly accelerate the provision of basic foundational learning to ensure a good start for all children. Third, place young people at the center of transforming education system, seizing on their energy, creativity, and hunger to contribute to change. Excellency, let me close with a quote from Khalil Gibran. Quote, "Your children are not your children. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for the souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams." End quote. I believe that the house of tomorrow for Africans' children will be a good house, an Africa which is an influential and global force for change, with empowered and productive citizens as envisioned in the African Union Agenda 2063. Transformative change is possible. We are at a pivotal moment in our history that may not come around again. Education holds the key for a future full of promise for our children and youth. Learning cannot wait. Now is the time for action. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, UNICEF. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, also in our midst is the Assistant Executive Director for Partnerships and Innovation at the World Food Programme. And I have the honor to invite Madame Raina Dagas Kamara to give the commitment from the World Food Programme. Madame Kamara, you are welcome.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. Your Excellencies, Madame President, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, distinguished leaders, and honorable guests. It's a profound honor to address this esteemed assembly on behalf of the World Food Programme. We are graced today by the presence of eminent figures from across the continent, from across the globe, and many organizations who are actually the pillars of our shared vision and aspiration. I'm also very delighted to be back home in Addis and in the African Union Commission. Your Excellencies, it's really hard to come after all the speakers, and they've said all that they have said this afternoon. But there is an angle that we bring from the World Food Programme that I think is important to emphasize. We have 3 points today. The first, we are convened here to emphasize the importance of the transformative power of education. I think we've established that. Agreed? None of us would be here if we were not educated. So that is established. The second point is about achieving the full benefits of education. We cannot do them when we are fighting a disheartening plague of hunger, when many of the children are hungry. What the World Food Programme reports is 350 million people in 79 countries are facing severe hunger and some would say teetering on starvation. So the connection between nutrition and learning is well established. Healthy, well-nourished children perform better academically, and they're able to thrive, and they contribute meaningfully to society. I remember a story when I was going to a nursery in our local neighborhood in Khartoum, and there was a honey sandwich that they gave us at break time. I returned every day for that honey sandwich. And I think it is quite fundamental for us to accept that school meals do more than feed children. They serve the foundation of education and health and are critical to developing human capital. We're largely engaged as WFP in many initiatives to support education, vulnerable, feed insecure communities, but we provide children with nutritious meals at schools is a critical component for both education and health. My third point, and that's the last one I promise, is about the economics as well. So I'm going to throw a few more numbers at you. WFP recently conducted a survey with the Harvard University, and we found that for every $1 invested in school feeding, that yielded $9 in economic return. Every $1 in school feeding, $9 in economic return. So these programs are lifelines that provide often the only meal a day for many families, but they safeguard health and education and well-being. There's a substantial global investment of $48 billion in school meal programs. Established, it's considerable, and it's predictable and it also markets foods, and it presents an exceptional opportunity to revolutionize food systems and dietary patterns. This approach is instrumental in addressing the challenges posed by the global food crisis, which Africa is at the heart of. So, Your Excellencies, with over 6 decades of experience, WFP has continued to play a crucial role in supporting governments with these school meal programs. And now, some good news. Our main role has been to support governments in the establishment and sustainability of school feeding initiatives. Believe it or not, we have proudly facilitated the transition to national ownership in 44 countries, with African governments making remarkable strides, contributing 85% of domestic funding for these programs. So with or without you, Finance Minister, previously, and with everything Professor Sachs has said, there is a commitment to support school feeding and to keep children in school. Now, we have been instrumental in lower income and fragile states because we support about 15 million children. And a lot of our focus has been around sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. But we also serve as a global knowledge holder and coordinator of the School Meals Coalition, the State of School Feeding, and the Global School Meals Database. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that the World Food Programme stands in solidarity with the African Union and its member states. We're committed to the theme of the year. We look forward to supporting the Africa Day of School Feeding and the Innovative Education in Africa Challenge. And our journey is one of transformation, as all of you have said. And that is aimed at unlocking the potential of every child in this continent. Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you, Madam Kamara. And I have the honor to invite the African Development Bank's Director of Human Capital, Youth and Skills Development, Madam Marta Firi. Madam, you're welcome.
Your Excellency, Madam Salewik, President of Ethiopia, Your Excellency, Mr. Musa Faki, Chairperson of the African Union, Your Excellencies, all protocols observed. I want to start on this note, Your Excellency, because I think it brings to my mind what the WFP was talking about. We were in this very beautiful country on the continent, and I was invited on behalf of the African Development Bank to speak on evidence-based policy making to combat acute malnutrition to prevent stunting. And so the lantern that they gave me, on which I was speaking, it was like this. And they couldn't see me the other side. So just to make light of the moment, I said we are here speaking about evidence-based policy making to address stunting. And I'm small. Obviously, perhaps when I was young, I suffered malnutrition. I don't know. But then the policy-based making, the policy-based discussion, Madam Chairperson, is so crucial even for the discussion we are having today. On behalf of the African Development Bank, I'm very delighted to be part of this conversation. Coming on the back of the African Union Year of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area last year, the focus on education could not have come at a more opportune time than this moment. Evidence from those that have done it, we have, listened to Professor Sachs. We have listened to the chairperson, Madam President, including, of course, the ECA as well. Evidence is there that if we are to achieve a thriving African market driven by a burgeoning middle class, we have to be deliberate, we have to be intentional, and we have to be consistent in investing in human capital. There are no two ways about it. Now, I'll not go into numbers because I'll bore you, but what I want to go into is what the African Development Bank, your bank, is doing in this space. So the African Development Bank over the past decade or so has invested about $1 billion strategically focusing on infrastructure for higher education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We have also focused on infrastructure for technical, vocation, and education training. And it's for the reasons that have been articulated here why this is fundamental and a foundation for industrialization as well as Africa's transformation. But we have learned lessons, and therefore the Skills for Employability and Productivity in Africa Action Plan that was adopted last year in 2022 still addresses the issue of infrastructure for STEM and infrastructure for TVET. But I just want to share with you a couple of learning points that makes us think that we are probably on the right track to address some of the structural bottlenecks that have been explained here. So to address the huge skills mismatch that we see and really confront the issue of graduate unemployment, our support to higher education, STEM, and TVET is done along priority value chains. So when we are investing in energy, we ask ourselves, what are the skills that are needed now and will be needed in the 10 to 15 years in order to build power plants, maintain them, rehabilitate them. So when we're investing in energy in Malawi, then we're already thinking about what are the skills that are needed to drive the energy sector. When we're investing in transport, we say what are the skills that will be needed to drive the transportation sector. The same with agriculture and so on and so forth. And we have gone beyond that to say, how do we keep pace with the fourth industrial revolution? Because it is unfolding at such a rapid pace, and Africa is already behind, and therefore we have to run even as we are babies. So how do we keep pace with that? So what we do is to make sure that the curricula that we are supporting within each country is strengthening digital and tech as a learning tool, while embedding skilling, upskilling, and reskilling. In that sense, you find you are actually trying to keep pace with the digital evolution. What is also important is to face this fact that even if Africa doesn't contribute as much to climate change, the impact on the continent, on the economies, is enormous. So confronted with the impact of climate change on the African economies, with our support, we are also supporting curricular development that focus on green and climate smart skills. And then the last bit is considering the number of youth that are finding jobs in the formal sector is just 1 out of 3, if anything. We are being very deliberate to support curricula that embed entrepreneurial skills with which we are complementing the setting up of investment funds to de-risk investment in young people. So we are harnessing entrepreneurship, but at the same time supporting the young people to start, grow, and scale their businesses. Now, in terms of, and this is my last point, in terms of resilience, how do we make sure that we have a sustainable approach to training? The policy environment is absolutely critical. And in that sense, we are supporting the development of the National Education Systems Strengthening Plan, where the governments are taking the lead in having the strengthening of the National Education Plan. Now, they have what they call a build overview of what is happening in different segments of the education training system and the financing gaps that are there, so that the donors, the partners, and the private sector come in to plug into those gaps. And we believe that the data and information system is critical in order for us to help monitor progress in terms of results we are achieving along this agenda. On that note, I thank you, and I wish you a productive year of education. Thank you so much.
Thank you, FDV. We now move to the EU, and I'm pleased to invite the Ambassador of the EU to the African Union, His Excellency Javier Nino Perez, for the EU's commitment.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency, Madam Sadewosfeld, the President of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia, Your Excellency, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mahamat, distinguished guests, all protocol observed. It's truly an honor for me to be here with you, represented Commissioner Urpilainen, whom, as you know, is a real champion for education. Let me first of all, Mr. Chairperson of the African Union Commission, congratulate you for having education at the theme of the year for the African Union, and also praise the work of Commissioner Bellucin that I have already met. Him and his team has shown an incredible leadership, and our cooperation with the African Union is excellent on many fronts, including education, research, and innovation. We all know that we are here to work on investments, and we all dream about big roads and submarine cables and railways, but we all know, and the President of Ethiopia already said so, that the greatest investment we can do is education. Education makes a difference, and I know this very well. I come from Spain, a very prosperous country where 86% of people have access to tertiary education. This was not the case when my parents grew up. They were both born to families with very limited financial means in the aftermath of the Spanish Civil War. Unlike most of their compatriots, they were lucky. They had access to education. They obtained a scholarship, and that made a difference. That made a difference for them as much as it makes a difference for millions in Africa who have access to education. Unfortunately, still many have not. The EU is aware of the importance of education, and thus we have to work together with the African Union here, together with many other partners in the world on education issues. We are the largest contributors to education in worldwide, and we are on track to increase our financial support for education from 7 to 13% of our international partnerships budget. Together with the African Union, Mr. Chairperson, we have made education and research one of our pillars of the Global Gateway Strategy. This is the EU's positive offer to our partner countries and our contributors to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, including Objective 4 related to education. Africa, the African Union and the EU, we work together. We listen to each other. We learn from each other. We respect each other, and we build together. And in that spirit, at the 2022 summit, we agreed to make education a priority of our Global Gateway Strategy and invest 150 billion together to make progress in this field. Since then, we have achieved a number of initiatives. We have, and I'm glad the President of Ethiopia referred to it, we have launched initiatives to support teachers, to help equip teachers and students with critical skill for the digital and green transitions. We have launched an initiative, again, with the African Union on youth mobility, working with the youth, working on higher education and learning mobility. Through our Horizon 22 program, we work with hundreds of universities throughout the continent, students and professors conducting and implementing programs within the continent. With our research initiative for scientific excellence, we focus on creativity and innovation. There's lots of that in that continent. And lastly, let me mention the Opportunity-Driven Skill Program, which focuses on vocational training. C'est que quelques exemples, Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Président, chers invités, de toutes les actions que nous bâtissons ensemble. Il y en a d'autres, mais je crois que ce sont de bons exemples de tout ce que nous pouvons faire pour confronter les défis de l'éducation. L'Union européenne est et continuera à être un leader dans le domaine de l'éducation, et travailler ensemble avec l'Union africaine, on veut continuer à faire des avancées pour les objectifs de développement sustainable, et particulièrement l'objectif numéro 4. Kofi Annan once said that education is the premise for progress in every individual, in every family. He also said that education is the cornerstone for freedom, democracy, and sustainable development. He added that education is the bridge from misery to hope. Let's all work together to help millions of Africans cross that bridge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And once again, we thank all partners for their commitments and pledges and words of inspiration and support that they've made here. And this takes us to the last segment of this ceremony, which is the closing session. And I'm honored to invite His Excellency Professor Mohamed Belhossein, who is the AUC Commissioner for Education, Science, Technology, and Innovation, to deliver the closing address. Your Excellency.
Thank you so much, Madame la Présidente de la République fédérale démocratique d'Éthiopie, Monsieur le Président de la Commission, mes chers invités, chers amis, chers collègues, tout protocole observé. Du sud de l'Afrique, avec la citation de Nelson Mandela, au nord de l'Afrique, où j'ai grandi et où j'ai étudié. D'abord comme petit enfant colonisé, pendant la guerre, sous les bombes de l'armée coloniale. Et plus tard, dans le bonheur de l'indépendance. J'avais 11 ans, c'était ma première année de collège ou de lycée en fait. Et à l'entrée de mon lycée, il y avait un cadre dans lequel il y avait une citation de notre premier président de la République, membre fondateur de l'Organisation de l'Unité africaine, le président Ahmed Ben Bella, que Dieu ait son âme. Cette citation disait « Tout peuple qui ne s'instruit pas périclite et meurt, et tôt ou tard... » Alors, tout peuple qui ne s'instruit pas périclite et meurt, et tôt ou tard, il tombe en état de sujétion. C'est dire l'importance de l'éducation dont nous avons entendu parler aujourd'hui. Mais quand je pense que 60 ans en arrière, la conscience était déjà aiguë de l'importance de l'éducation dans tous nos pays qui ont pris l'indépendance dans ces années 60, et qu'aujourd'hui encore nous parlons avec les mêmes problèmes, avec la même acuité, qu'est-ce qui n'a pas marché? Et je fais écho au speech de son Excellence Madame la Présidente de l'Éthiopie, qui dit faire toujours plus de ce qui ne marche pas ne nous fera pas marcher, ne nous fera pas avancer. Et donc réellement, j'ai bien pris note de toutes les propositions mises sur la table depuis le nouveau contrat social autour de l'éducation, à des propositions innovantes de financement de l'éducation brillamment mises en exergue par le professeur Jeffrey Sachs, aux actions proposées par nos partenaires qui ont pris la parole, et je voudrais les saluer tous, et je voudrais aussi ici témoigner de leur engagement et de leur accompagnement durant tout le travail de préparation que nous avons fait pour préparer la note conceptuelle et la feuille de route. Et je voudrais aussi m'excuser auprès des partenaires qui n'ont pas pu prendre la parole parce que le temps nous était limité à cause du calendrier précis de Monsieur le Président de la Commission et des hauts dignitaires qui sont ici, mais que je voudrais reconnaître ici et rassurer que nous continuerons à travailler avec vous tous, que nous allons revenir vers vous autour des points sur lesquels vous avez montré votre engagement aujourd'hui ici. Et nous sommes aussi en discussion avec d'autres pour explorer d'autres pistes. Mais je voudrais aussi insister sur un point qui est très important à mon avis, qui est le fait que un des représentants de pays, un ambassadeur, lors des discussions du Conseil exécutif durant les 2 derniers jours, l'a si bien dit. En fait, l'éducation est tellement importante qu'on ne devrait pas avoir une année, qu'on ne devait pas l'avoir comme thème pour une année, mais qu'elle devrait être un thème permanent de l'attention de l'Union africaine. Donc je souhaite que tous ensemble, nous continuions à travailler dans ce sens, en laissant toujours à l'esprit le driving seat, le pilotage de toute action reste au niveau des pays, et que nous ne sommes que des catalyseurs, des accompagnateurs et des conseillers pour le meilleur de l'avenir de nos enfants et pour la réalisation à la fois des objectifs de l'agenda 2063 et des objectifs de développement durable. Je pense qu'on a suffisamment entendu de paroles ici et là. Je ne vais pas continuer trop longtemps. Je vous remercie tous et toutes d'être venus, et je souhaite que ce ne soit que le point de départ d'activités réellement concrètes sur le terrain, et que nous aurons, Inch'Allah, d'ici juillet, pour le mi-parcours, et d'ici le prochain sommet de l'Union africaine, à rapporter ensemble des actions qui auront véritablement eu un impact dans le sens de la transformation de l'éducation dans notre continent. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Commissioner. And this brings us to the end of this ceremony. But before we leave, I'd like to make this announcement. There is a group photo following this ceremony that will be taken in front of Nelson Mandela Hall, and we invite Her Excellency, the President of Ethiopia, His Excellency the Chair of the AUC, Her Excellency the Deputy Chair, ambassadors, honorable ministers, heads of partner organizations, and senior management of the Commission to join the group photo at the entrance of the Nelson Mandela Hall. Thank you all of you once again for attending this ceremony. Bye-bye. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before the group photo, we have a cake cutting ceremony to be presided over by Her Excellency the President of Ethiopia and the Chair of the AUC. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Chair. We appreciate it.